What's up everyone, Lily's here. Today let's talk about the hardest bar chart in Cambridge IELTS books. There are 18 numbers in this chart. I will show you how to report those numbers that are important. But most importantly, I will show you how to deal with those numbers that are less important. Let's start with the introductory paragraph, which should be a paraphrase of this text. The chart below shows how frequently people in the USA ate in fast food restaurants between 2003 and 2013. For this clause, we can actually use a totally different grammatical construction to rewrite it. So the original uses the adverb frequently, how frequently people did something. We can instead use the noun frequency. But of course, we need to first know how to use this noun. Here's a quote from TechCrunch. The services we rely on are letting us down with a frequency that is simply unacceptable. Note here, the preposition with is used. With a frequency has the sense of how often something happens. At a frequency is also correct, but it mostly refers to sound and radio waves. Now let's use with a frequency to paraphrase. The bar chart shows the frequency with which people in the USA ate in fast food outlets between 2003 and 2013. Another way is to use by plus the category name. So for this chart, the categories are different frequencies, so we can use by frequency. Here, by means according to, and remember that you should always use a singular noun here, by frequency, not by frequencies. The chart shows by frequency the percentages of people in the USA who ate in fast food outlets between 2003 and 2013. By frequency modifies show. By plus the category name is a very useful paraphrasing technique. Here's another example. This first chart shows the main reasons for study among students of different age groups. The categories are different age groups, so we can use by age group to paraphrase. The first graph shows by age group why students studied. Remember that you should use the singular age group and not the plural age groups. I also want to explain why I use the plural percentages instead of the singular percentage. For example, when describing the once a week category, we can say that the percentage of people who ate in fast food restaurants once a week increased from roughly 31% in 2003 to 33% in 2006, but then decreased to about 27% in 2013. Here, it's best to use the singular percentage because the percentage of people who ate in fast food restaurants once a week is a variable that can take different values in different time frames. There is only one percentage in each year. However, it's best to use the plural percentages when there is more than one category in your sentence. For example, when reporting the figures for these two categories in 2003, we could say that the percentages of people who ate in fast food restaurants once a week and those eating there once or twice a month stood at roughly 31 and 30% respectively. Here, it's best to use the plural percentages simply because there are two different percentages for the year 2003. Here, we are talking about different percentages in different categories. That's why I use the plural percentages. Alright, the introductory paragraph is done. Let's move on to the overview paragraph. This paragraph should be about the most important features of the chart. You may hear some else gurus say that if the chart shows trends, all you need to do is describe the general trends of all categories in your overview. Yes, this works for many charts, but every chart is different. For this chart, do you really want to list all 6 categories like this in your overview? Overall, the percentages of people eating in fast food restaurants once or twice a month and those eating there a few times a year increased, while the percentages of those eating there once a week, those eating there several times a week, those eating there every day, and those never eating there decreased. God, it's a lot of words. Most importantly, I seriously don't think trends are the most important features of this chart. When looking at this chart, we would first notice that these two categories are the biggest categories in all 3 years, would we? I seriously think this is the single most obvious feature of this chart. Overall, in all 3 years, the two largest groups were those eating in fast food restaurants once a week and those eating there once or twice a month. Note how I used the there to avoid repeating fast food restaurants. It may not be enough to describe only 2 categories out of the 6, so I'm going to add the 2 smallest categories. Those eating there daily and those never eating there in comparison accounted for the smallest proportions. This paragraph is also done. Now let's move on to details paragraph 1. I will describe these 2 categories in this paragraph because they are the 2 biggest categories. They are the most important categories. And I think important categories are actually super easy to describe. All 6 numbers in these 2 categories are important, so we simply report them all. Let's start with the category once a week. Even though you can change every day to daily, you shouldn't change once a week to weekly. This is because weekly can mean once a week or several times a week, so we should just use the original wording. I will first say these 2 numbers are the biggest in 2003 and 2006. People eating in fast food outlets once a week represented the largest segment of people in the USA in both 2003 and 2006 at about 31 and 33% respectively. Some people may want to describe the upward trend between the 2 years. You have to make a choice. There are so many numbers in this chart. If you describe the upward trend and also say these 2 numbers are the biggest, you will end up writing too many words. You have to decide which feature is more important. I personally think being the biggest is a more important feature. I think what matters is that this category was the biggest in 2003 and 2006, but decreased in 2013. Now I'm going to describe the downward trend. However, the proportion dropped to roughly 27% in 2013. Now, once or twice a month. As you can see, this category was the biggest in 2013. So I will say that it decreased and then increased and became the biggest. The proportion of those who fell into the once or twice a month category first declined from 30 to 25% between 2003 and 2006. It then went up significantly to around 33% in 2013, making this category the largest that year. This paragraph is done. Let's move on to details paragraph 2, in which I will describe the remaining 4 categories. These 4 categories are less important, so we shouldn't report every single piece of data in these 4 categories. The key here is to give a range. For example, for this category, we can say that the figure ranged or varied between 15 and 20%. You can say 16 and 20% if you want, but you don't need to be that precise since this is just a range. And be careful that fluctuate is not appropriate here. You could use it if the percentage varied irregularly. However, there was only little change during the 3 years. Also, there are only 3 data points. Fluctuate is a bad choice with only 3 data points. The proportion of those eating in fast food restaurants several times a week varied between 15 and 20%. Now, for this category, I will just say it increased. You may end up writing too many words if you say it increased and then stayed unchanged. While the proportion eating there a few times a year showed an increase from approximately 13 to 15% over the period. Now, for the remaining 2 categories, definitely group them together to report because their numbers are quite similar. Let's just give a range. Let's say that in each year, the percentages are no higher than 5%. In any year, the everyday and the never categories each contained no more than 5% of people. Be careful not to say something like this. No more than 5% of people fall into the everyday and the narrow categories in any year. This is saying these people fall into both the everyday and the narrow categories. This is wrong because they can't be in one category and the other at the same time. This paragraph is done. The way I deal with the numbers in these three categories is to give a range rather than to omit some of the numbers. Here's the entire essay. Here are some key takeaways. Use by plus the category name to paraphrase. This method works for many charts, although I showed you only 2 examples in this video. For the overview paragraph, you need to judge whether you should describe general trends or whether the biggest categories are more important features. You also need to know when to use a singular noun and when to use a plural noun. The key to dealing with less important data is to give a range. Here's a playlist of videos on dealing with data. Watch them all to become a data expert. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye!